The iron lock spun across the farmhouse floor, and Rand dropped the hot tea kettle as a huge figure with ram's horns on its head loomed in the doorway, with the darkness of winter night behind it. "Run!" Tam shouted. His sword flashed, and the Trolloc toppled, but it grappled with Tam as it fell, pulling him down. More crowded in at the door, black mailed shapes of human faces distorted with muzzles and beaks and horns, oddly curved swords stabbing at Tam as he tried to struggle to his feet, spiked axes swinging, red blood on steel. "Father!" Rand screamed, clawing his belt knife from its sheath. He threw himself over the table to help his father, and screamed again as the thirst sword ran through his chest. Blood bubbled up into his mouth, and a voice whispered in his head. "I have won again, Nus Therin." Flicker. Rand struggled to hold the symbol, dimly aware of Veren's voice. "Is not." The power flooded. Flicker. Rand was happy after he married Egwene, and tried to not let the moods take him. The times when he thought there should be something more, something different. News of the world outside came into the Two Rivers with peddlers and merchants come to buy wool and tobacco. Always news of fresh troubles, of wars and false dragons everywhere. There was a year when neither merchants nor peddlers came, and when they returned the next, they brought word that Arthur Hawkwind's armies had come back, or they'd sentenced at least. The old nations were broken, it was said, and the world's new masters, who used chained Aes Sedai in their battles, had torn down the White Tower and salted the ground where Tar Valon had stood. There were no more Aes Sedai. It made little difference in the Two Rivers. Crops still had to be planted, sheep sheared, lambs tended. Tam had grandsons and granddaughters to dandle on his knee before he was laid to rest beside his wife, and the old farmhouse grew new rooms. Egwene became wisdom, and most thought that she was better than even the old wisdom Nynaeve Almira had been. It was as well she was, for her cures that worked so miraculously on others were only just able to keep Rand alive from the sickness that constantly seemed to threaten him. His moods grew worse, blacker, and he raged that this was not what was meant to be. Egwene grew frightened when the moods were on him, for strange things sometimes happened when he was at his bleakest. Lightning storms she had not heard listening to the wind, wildfires in the forest. But she loved him and cared for him and kept him sane, though some muttered that Rand al'Thor was crazy and dangerous. When she died, he sat alone for long hours by her grave, tears soaking his grey-flecked beard. His sickness came back, and he wasted. He lost the last 2 fingers on his right hand, and 1 on his left. His ears looked like scars, and men muttered that he smelled of decay. His blackness deepened. Yet when the dire news came, none refused to accept him at their side. Trollocs and Thaids and things undreamed of had burst out of the Blight, and the world's new masters were being thrown back for all the powers they wielded. So Rand took up the bow he had just fingers enough left to shoot, and limped with those who marched north to the River Terran, men from every village, farm, and corner of the Two Rivers, with their bows and axes and boar spears and swords that had lain rusting in attics. Rand wore a sword too, with a heron on the blade that he had found after Tam died, though he knew nothing of how to use it. Women came too, shouldering what weapons they could find, marching alongside the men. Some laughed, saying that they had this strange feeling they had done this before. And at the Terran, the people of the Two Rivers met the invaders. Endless ranks of Trollocs led by nightmare Thaids beneath a dead black banner that seemed to eat the light. Rand saw that banner and thought the madness had taken him again, for it seemed that this was what he had been born for, to fight that banner. He sent every arrow at it, straight as his skill and the void would serve, never worrying about the Trollocs forcing their way across the river, or the men and women dying to either side of him. It was one of those Trollocs that ran him through, for it loped howling for blood deeper into the Two Rivers, as he lay on the bank of the Tarran, watching the sky seem to grow dark at noon, breath coming over slowly. He heard a voice say, "I have won again, Nus Therin." Flicker. The arrow in the circle contorted into parallel, wavy lines, and he fought it back again. Veren's voice, "Right, something." The power raged. Flicker. Tam tried to console Rand when Egwene took sick and died just a week before their wedding. Nynaeve tried too, but she was shaken herself, since for all her skill she had no idea what it was that had killed the girl. Rand had sat outside Egwene's house while she died, and there seemed to be nowhere in Emond's Field he could go that he did not still hear her screaming. He knew he could not stay. Tam gave him a sword with a heron-marked blade, and though he explained little of how a shepherd in the Two Rivers had come by such a blade, he taught Rand how to use it. On the day Rand left, Tam gave him a letter he said might get Rand taken into the army of Ilion, and he hugged him and said, "I've never had another son, or wanted another. Come back with a wife like I did, if you can, boy, but come back in any case." Rand had his money stolen in Baerlon, though, and his letter of introduction, and almost his sword, and he met a woman called Min, who told him such crazy things about himself that he finally left the city to get away from her. Eventually his wanderings brought him to Caemlyn, and there his skill with the sword earned him a place in the Queen's Guards. Sometimes he found himself looking at the daughter heir Elaine, and at such times he was filled with odd thoughts that this was not the way things were supposed to be, that there should be something more to his life. Elaine did not look at him, of course. She was married to a Terran prince, though she did not seem happy in it. Rand was just a soldier, once a shepherd from a small village so far toward the western border that only lines on a map any longer truly connected it to Andor. Besides, he had a dark reputation as a man of violent moods. Some said he was mad, and in ordinary times perhaps not even his skill with the sword would have kept him in the guard. But these were not ordinary times. False dragons sprang up like weeds. Every time one was taken down, two more proclaimed themselves, or three, till every nation was torn by war. And Rand's star rose, for he had learned the secret of his madness, a secret that he knew he had to keep, and did. He could channel. There were always places, times, in a battle when a little channeling, not big enough to be noticed in the confusion, could make luck. Sometimes it worked, this channeling, and sometimes not, but it worked often enough. He knew he was mad, and he did not care. A wasting sickness came on him, and he did not care about that either, and neither did anyone else. For word had come that Arthur Hawkwind's armies had returned to reclaim the land. Rand led 1,000 men when the Queen's Guard crossed the Mountains of Mist. He never thought of turning aside to visit the Two Rivers. He seldom thought of the Two Rivers at all anymore. And he commanded the guard when the shattered remnants retreated back across the mountains. The length of Andor he fought and fell back, amid hordes of fleeing refugees, until at last he came to Caemlyn. Many of the people of Caemlyn had fled already, and many counselled the army to retreat further. But Elaine was queen now, and vowed she would not leave Caemlyn. She would not look at his ruined face, scarred by his sickness, but he could not leave her, and so what was left of the Queen's Guards prepared to defend the Queen while her people ran. The power came to him during the battle for Caemlyn, and he hurled lightning and fire among the invaders, and split the earth under their feet. Yet the feeling came again too, that he had been born for something else. For all he did, there were too many of the enemy to stop, and they also had those who could channel. At last a lightning bolt hurled Rand from the palace wall, broken, bleeding and burned. And as his last breath rattled in his throat, he heard a voice whisper, "I have won again, Lews Therin." Flicker. Rand struggled to hold the void as it quivered under the hammer blows of the world flickering, to hold the one symbol as 1,000 of them darted among the surface of the void. He struggled to hold on to any one symbol. "It's wrong!" Verin screamed. The power was everything. Flicker, 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 flicker. He was a soldier. He was a shepherd. He was a beggar and a king. He was a farmer, gleeman, sailor, carpenter. He was born, lived, and died in Aiel. He died mad. He died rotting. He died of sickness, accident, age. He was executed, and multitudes cheered his death. He proclaimed himself the Dragon Reborn and flung his banner across the sky. He ran from the power and hid. He lived and died never knowing. He held off the madness and sickness for years. He succumbed between two winters. Sometimes Moraine came and took him away from the Two Rivers, alone, or with those of his friends who had survived Winter Night. Sometimes she did not. Sometimes other Aes Sedai came for him. Sometimes the Red Aja. Egwene married him. Egwene, stern-faced in the stole of the Amyrlin seat, led the Aes Sedai who gentled him. Egwene, with tears in her eyes, plunged a dagger into his heart, and he thanked her as he died. He loved other women, married other women, Elaine and Min, and a fair-haired farmer's daughter met on the road to Caemlyn, and women he had never seen before. He lived those lives. 100 lives. More. So many he could not count them. And at the end of every life, as he lay, dying, As he drew his final breath, a voice whispered in his ear, "I have won again, Lews Therin. Flicker, 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 flicker."